Hey everyone, how are you doing? It would help if I had the mic. How are you doing? I'm Niall. Welcome back to the H20 BIM channel. Today we're going to talk about 10 unsung hero features, basically, of Revit 2022. Now, these are by no means my favorite features. I'm not going to sit here and say that these are the best features that have come out. Not at all. That crown remains with the revision sequencing updates, but I think that these are worthy enough of mention, of real kind of thoughtful consideration within your own organization, your own workflows, okay? They haven't been really talked about at all by others, and I feel that, we could collectively benefit by implementing some of them. Some of them are more, let's say, less Revit-centric overall features, let's say, and more kind of discipline-centric features, and so be it. But yeah, they're all pretty nifty. I'm really, really happy with this update compared to, I wouldn't even call the previous updates. But I think they've knocked it out of the park at Revit 2022. I won't delay any further. I'm Niall, this is H20 BIM. As always, if you like this content, you know what to do below. Like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Head on over to the Discord community there. The link is in the description. If you ever want to just catch up and chat or talk things BIM, you're more than welcome there. And yeah, let's talk about the 10 features that nobody else seems to be talking about. So the first feature I want to talk about today is the ability to share 2D views. Now, I think Autodesk made a bit of a bags of actually describing what this is. This means the ability to take 2D sheets and views directly out of your model and send them across to the Autodesk free viewer, which is an online viewer, which I think is absolutely a quality little tool there. I actually have a full video on that if you want to go check that out. It's up in the eye there somewhere, okay? But the ability to share with third parties views straight from the model for them to comment, mark up, relay information back to you, still within the Revit model environment. So what it does is it gives people who are non-AEC professionals who don't have access to the AEC collection or to the Autodesk utilities still be able to kind of integrate in some sort of meaningful way and describe their requirements to the user within the environment. Okay, so looking at this view here, we have a 2D plan open of a office that we did previously. This was actually a model specifically orienting around groups and their functions and the benefits of them, that kind of thing. And again, up in the eye there, there'll be a drop down if you want to learn more about Revit groups. Okay, but in this example here, I want to take this 2D view and I want to send it over to a third party, let's say a client, for comments and review. Okay, so if you go to your, Collaborate tab, you can see now on the right hand side shared views. Now previously shared views was implemented in Revit 2021, but it only allowed the sharing of 3D views. Now you can do sheets and standard 2D views as well. Okay, so now that I'm in this view, I want to press new shared view. Okay, and I'm going to call this office layout, and I'm going to press share. Okay. Now, this may take a moment. Okay, so I'm going to very quickly stop recording and I'll come back to you once it's actually extracted the information and uploaded it to the cloud. So now we're back and you can see that the office layout has been shared successfully. Okay, that took about 30 seconds all in. Okay, and you can see that there's view in browser or copy link. So we can copy the link directly from here. Okay, and send it to a client via email, via another format, via IM or something like that, okay? We can also click this and immediately go view in browser. But you can see that we actually have access to the shared views from within the Revit project itself, okay? So if we click view in browser, it'll open a new browser window, okay? And if you have your Autodesk account logged in to your Autodesk viewer, you can immediately view it from the browser. Also, if you send the link over to the client, they can immediately access it as well. So let's in this instance pretend we're a client, okay, and we're going to mark up this, okay? So I'm just going to select cloud, I'm going to click over here, and we're just going to put in text here, 20 seats required, let's say, okay? And we're going to save that, okay? So you can see now that our first comment has been populated. So it's been updated by myself, and we have a link to the comment, which can be sent back, okay? But the user, the Revit user who's still in the Revit environment, can go into their shared views dialog at all times and actually see the reference information, okay? So again, if I'm back here in the office layout, I can reload that and you can see that there's one comment, okay? And the comment is highlighted there, okay? So that I click that again, it'll take me in and show me the comment itself, okay? So Now I can see the client comment. Moving away from that, within the Revit environment itself, as the Revit user, I can actually reply to the client in this instance and say, okay, no problem, we'll see to that. Okay, press post. And going back to the viewer, I'm going to click into the shared view itself, pretending again that I am the client. I'm going to go to comments, and you can see that my comment was automatically re-uploaded to the platform for the client to see. Okay, so this is a fantastic way of having a direct communication chain with someone who is not necessarily an industry professional, who doesn't necessarily have all the utilities like free viewers and PDF creators like Bluebeam, Review, and that kind of thing. This is a great way of having a dialogue within the context of the actual Revit environment itself. And the 3D view sharing capability is brilliant, but the 2D was really necessary, and I'm glad that they've implemented it now. Okay, as I said before, I've actually done a full breakdown video of the utility of the Autodesk viewer. I recommend you go check that out if you're interested. But that is the new 2D shared views function in Revit. I think they could have named it better so people actually understood what it does, but that in essence is what it does. So the second feature I want to talk you through is the fact that tags can now remember their element hosting from linked files. Okay, so there's basically tags can rehost to their links if the links are unloaded at any point and then reloaded. This is particularly useful on very, very large projects where you may have models specific for annotating and sheeting information for the contractors that actually have nothing but links coming into them. There's no actual model geometry in the host file. It's merely the place to compile information and to put all your referencing, your schedules, all that kind of thing. Okay, so looking on the screen here, we have a structural model. Okay, and in that structural model, if we go down to the ground floor unit D, which is one quadrant of the structural file here, you can see that we have all these tags belonging to our walls, wall type B, wall type A, this kind of thing. Okay, very generic tagging. You get the drift. Okay, going across to the architectural envelope for the same. Okay, so the architectural envelope model is hosting the structural model as a link. Okay, and going onto the same ground floor plan, you can see that we actually have the tags for the link present in the host model or the parent model, in this case the architectural model. Okay, so you can see that these tags are not readily selectable because they belong to the host. Okay, and in the architectural model itself, they are tagged linked elements. Okay, so we're not seeing the tags belonging to the link itself. We are seeing the tags that we put into the host model that are referencing the linked file. And in historic Revit versions, what would happen is that if you unlinked this model at any given point, you would lose the association of these tags. So if you went up to manage and you said to manage links, and in this instance you unloaded the file, okay, you press OK, you would lose not only the geometry as you have in this view, but you would also lose the tags. Okay, now as you can see, we've lost the tags, but unlike the previous versions, Revit 2022, now when we go back in and we go to reload our structural model, press OK. And as you can see, the model restores, but through the element ID system that Revit has, it's actually retained the association of the tags within the host model to the link file, even though the link was temporarily unloaded. Okay, so that's a really, really useful feature. It's particularly important for larger firms who reference multiple files to put together their actual drawing packs. Just so you know, both those models are available to download from the links below if you're interested in having either one of them as well. So feature number 3 I want to talk about is the PeopleFlow Toolkit. Sorry, apologies. So the PeopleFlow Toolkit has been greatly expanded for Revit 2022. Historically, it used to do kind of a per route analysis on a one route basis. And it's a little bit janky. It's still a bit janky, but it's very, very good for early, let's say, egress route development, trying to work out your travel distances, that kind of stuff. And it automates a lot of it as well, which is really, really good. Okay, so looking on the screen here, if you want to access the PeopleFlow Toolkit, if you go to Analyze, you will see that we have route analysis, and it has both the path of travel, which is the existing format, but it also has additional tools such as multiple paths, one-way indicators, people content, and spatial grid. So I'm going to go through an example here very quickly. Looking at the model in front of us, this is actually a model that I used previously to describe phasing in detail. It's very basic, but the detailed video on it is actually very informative. I'll put it in the eye again if you want to go check that out, if you need to learn a bit about phasing. But looking at the tools we have now, okay, we can first of all reveal obstacles, okay? So when we select reveal obstacles, what it'll do, it'll automatically color everything that's designated an obstacle in orange, okay? So this is the same kind of presentation as you might have from hide reveal elements or that kind of thing, but what it does is it highlights the obstacles as orange, and therefore it shows what the path of egress will not be able to go through, okay? So turning that off, we obviously have our existing path of travel. And let's say I go from the canteen to here. What it'll do is it'll automatically find the exit points through the doors, avoiding the various conflicts that it might have with walls or furnishings or whatever you have designated as an obstacle, okay? And here we have a line, and we have a distance now, so we know that this is 37.5 meters approximately, okay? So that's great, but that's only one line, okay? So what happens if we wanted to do many, okay? So let's say we want to do multiple paths. We want to analyze how many different egress routes there are from this one room. So looking at the canteen room there, again, I'm going to select multiple paths, and you can see that it has minimum path separation, okay? So I'm going to leave that as 1,000 for a moment, and I'm just going to click from there, apologies, I'll do that again, multiple paths, and I'm going to select from there to here, and you can see that it's created 2 paths for me, okay? Now, we obviously intuitively know that there's more paths here, so we could potentially go up and arc through these doors and all the way through, okay? Or we could go up and out and around and in. So there's many variations on this, but what this has done is identify the two paths that are the quickest and shortest routes to the same location for us, while maintaining that minimum distance between them, okay, which is 1 meter, okay? So what it'll do is it'll try bring the paths of travel as close together as possible while giving you options for the routes, okay? So deleting those 2 then, okay, we can obviously change that value. So let's say if we say multiple paths and we go really narrow, we say 400 and press OK and do the same, you'll see now we actually have 4 paths because it tries bring them as close together as possible while giving you a multivariant of options. So at 400 mil, 3 people can pass through that door, including a 4th, with the circulation then changing through these additional doors, okay? So selecting those and getting rid of those again, okay? The next thing I want to talk to you about is the people content, okay? So we can actually introduce what's called people content. I can put a person there, and I can maybe put a person there, for example, and maybe just one down here, just make things a bit awkward, okay? And when I go to reveal obstacles, you will see that the people are shown up as obstacles. So what these are spatial zones around people where you expect there to be a backlog of people, and it gives you an idea of your maximum occupancy factor, okay? So you can actually load in a certain number of people for any designated area in line with what your max occupancy factor is for your specific building, okay? So then we can go to our multiple paths. I'm going to set that to 1,000 again, just because that seems a little bit more reasonable. And now we're going to draw our multiple paths, okay? And now you can see that the system is intelligent enough to recognize the circulation zone around the people at 2 meters as an obstacle. And what it's doing is it's automatically routing around the people, okay? And you can see here, it just does a little dog leg and back, okay? So we can actually introduce people content now and get an idea of the spaces, okay? We can also test this a little bit further by putting in one-way indicators, okay? So you can see that the orientation of all these doors are kind of sensibly laid out to run towards this back of warehouse building, with the exception of these 2 here, okay? And it might be a case that these 2 are meant for, like, let's say a material flow that goes from warehouse through to production or vice versa, okay? And in that instance, we may want to actually indicate that these doors are one-way only as such, okay? And now, going back to our multiple paths, we have our minimum path separation of 1 meter. We're going to click from our canteen to our exit door here, okay? And now you can see that it's actually recognizing those doors as obstacles. We can't go through those doors. And again, what it's doing is it's rationalizing the most straightforward 2 routes. So what it's going to do is it's going to take us up between these 2 doors and down, but also because we have a minimum distance requirement and it has to maintain it, it can't double up on that. It doesn't really want to go in through here either because it's going to be too tight. So what does it do? It sends it second path around the building, okay? Merely because we put technically what are 2 more obstacles in the way, okay? Now these one directions indicators, they don't show as obstacles, but they merely show that the door only functions in one way. If I was to delete those 2 and change the orientation, the direction that the path is going from here to here, you will see that it won't recognize those doors as a problem. It'll go straight through because it's in the direction that the doors are set as the flow direction. Okay, so closing that again. One of the final things that we have then is the spatial grid. So we can assign a square or a hexagonal spatial grid now, okay? And we can give a grid spacing of 1500, 1 meter, 2 meters, what have you, okay? And all we need to do in order to use this tool is we can press OK. And you see the way we got our finish and cancel up here, and we also have our multiple indicator. We can select a room. So let's say I select that room there and I press finish. What we'll do is we'll get a grid similar to something like a ceiling grid and a reflected ceiling plan that we can then tab and select the boundaries of the hexagonal or square zones and move into position. So let's say we do that. And if you imagine we had, let's say, a series, I know this is called a warehouse, but let's say we had a series of circular tables or something like that with a minimum circulation zone, we can put them squarely in the middle, or in this instance, I can kind of shunt my my little person there, and we can get an idea of the spatial mapping of a room when we're designing it. So we can actually, let's say, populate this with tables for a canteen or something similar to that, and actually have an idea of the spatial requirements in a grid, which at any given point then can just be deleted away, and we know that we're working within a grid and a distance and a load occupancy factor that will allow, let's say, the backs of chairs to have sufficient spacing for people to transgress through the route. Finally, I just want to touch on the route analysis settings themselves, and what we can actually do is we can actually define outright what are deemed obstacles and what are not. Okay, so as a default, basically everything is set as an obstacle with the exception of doors in this instance. Okay, but we can actually fine tune this, hone this in, and change what our criteria are for generating the automated path of travel. So as you can tell, rather than like just a manual input, this can be a little bit janky. Okay, but beyond that, there's so many benefits to this, particularly in the front end of project development, that it just can't be ignored anymore. It's not a gimmick. It is a really meaningful, good piece of design. Let's say design functionality that we can leverage. It was available in 2021 as one of the OR version updates that you could install as an add-on, but I'm glad they've integrated it. The final thing that we can do on the multiple paths, let's say, when I generate them, we've got our 2 paths there, is we can actually schedule these. So if we go into view and we go to our schedules, schedule quantities, okay, and we travel down to our lines, you can see we have path of travel lines, okay. And what's really impressive about this is we can put in our count, we can go from room to room, we can report our overall length, and we can even put in our speed and time, and we can press OK. And as you can see now, we have a full schedule of all of our paths of egress that we can actually put adjacent to the drawing with a tag against the actual lines themselves and a reference from room to room. And it makes it very, very straightforward to populate all this information rather than trying to create specific key legends or anything like that. Okay, so that was number 3, I believe, the People Flow Toolkit. I think it is very, very useful for front-end design. I wish it had more functionality. I wish we could maybe develop this a bit further so that it could be used for not just path of egress, but general personnel flows, material flows, waste flows, all of these things that you might get in different environments outside of commercial or residential. So I think there's capacity for this to grow, but it's really, really exciting to see. And I think that this is a bit of an understated one. A lot of architects will benefit from using this, particularly fire safety consultants in early project development. So The fourth feature I want to talk about is the ability to associate steel connections by profile size or member size or connection type. So we know for quite a few years now that there's been embedded steel connections in Revit. You can go to this connection dialog under steel and you get all your various plates and that kind of thing that you can load in. But what Revit 2022 has done is it's given you a set of conditions for Dynamo with a standard script provided, basically, that will use some of the data that you input to a certain connection to array it around to every instance of a similar kind of profile match or connection type or end load scenario, let's say, okay, or end force scenario. So looking on the screen here, we have kind of just a generic steel model with 2 cores, okay, and let's just say on this floor here, I want to introduce a shear plate of some sort. Okay, so going into the steel tab under connection. Okay, if you don't have your connections loaded, if you press connection here and all you have is your generic connection, what you need to do is you need to go to steel and under this little arrow there on the drop down. If you select that, you can see that this is where you actually load in all your various connections from left to right, and you can actually pick which grouping of the connection, okay? So now that you have that in place, you can select your shear plate, okay? And what you do is just using the control button, you can pick the 2 elements that you want to join, okay? So let's say I want to join the secondary beam to the primary beam, okay? And I'm just gonna press enter. And as you can see, that's going to generate the connection. Now, obviously, this connection isn't detailed correctly, but we're going to ignore that and just drive on with the exercise. So with the connection itself now, when you go into the edit type properties within Revit, there's now this modify ranges of applicability, and this was never there previously. And what this gives us is the criteria for the Dynamo player to run with, so that Revit knows how to place the instances of the connection in various kind of scenarios, okay? So looking at the modify ranges of applicability, looking at the primary beam here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call it, and I'm going to call it shear plate connection rules, let's say. And you can see on the right hand side now we have a complete breakdown of how we can specify how these connections work, okay? So under the use parameters from, okay, section shape, I'm going to actually select family and section name, okay? And I'm just going to scroll down to universal beams, but I am going to leave that as any, because I want the secondary steels, which is the smaller 203 UB members, to dictate the type of connection that they have, not the primary, okay? So it could be to any one of these UB members that are available in the project. Once the secondary beam is the correct beam size, it will do it for every instance that it connects into any other beam size, okay? Now, scrolling down from there, if you wish, you can actually put in your forces, your end forces or your torsional forces. And this is brilliant. So let's say if you want to put a rule of thumb in, and let's say anything under 0.25 kilonewtons is only a double bolt. Anything above that might be 4 bolt arrangement, and so on, you know? So let's say if you're going to 1.5 kilonewtons per connection, you may want to have a 6 or an 8 bolt connection and larger plates and that kind of thing. So you can actually define the end forces here, and that will change the connection type as well, okay? But in this instance, we're going to keep it nice and simple. I'm going to go to element 2 then, which is the smaller, which is the secondary one, which I want to drive the information for Dynamo player, okay? And again, we're going to go family and section name. Under family, we're going to scroll down to our universal beams. And within the universal beams, I'm just going to select all the 203 UB members, okay? Because I know that my secondary steels in this model are all standardized to 203s. And I'm going to press OK. So what we've done is we've set our range of applicability for the connection. We've created the rules for the Dynamo player to actually follow, okay? So pressing OK then, we've set our first connection and we've set the rules for Dynamo player. Then what we need to do is use the Dynamo player. So if we go to manage and we go to Dynamo player, okay, you may have to navigate to find these scripts. They're kind of buried. They're not innately present. You may have to go to your file location here as shown. Okay, so you see the way, if you go down to your ENUS under your Revit 2022 within Dynamo, okay, go to Revit and you see steel connections in the library. So you want to make sure you're directed towards steel connections, because you might be on Dynamo Player 4 and if you're not seeing these by ranges for the various steel connections. Okay, so once you've actually loaded the correct library into the Dynamo player, okay, what I want to do before I run the Dynamo player actually is I just want to save our model, because we're actually going to point the Dynamo player to this file as the library file which defines the connections. So you could actually have a blank file if you wish, with all the connections defined in advance, and then every time you're doing a modeling exercise and you need to generate all your connections en masse, you can literally just point it towards this, basically this information rich empty file that's specific for connections, and it will actually generate all the connection rules for you that you can just let the Dynamo script run and you're off to the races. Okay, so now that we've done that, we're going back to our Dynamo player. We're hoping that you now have access to this, okay? And everything is by ranges. What we're looking for here is by ranges, okay? At the end, okay? And you can see base plate by ranges, beam end to end by ranges, okay? But what I wanted for this instance is beam to beam, okay? And we're going to press run. And you can see automatically the angle between the beams is picked up at 90 degrees, okay, because this is the angle that the beams will be placed at. So it's an assumed angle, but you can give it otherwise, okay. And what we want to do first is we're going to scroll out, and I'm going to select steel elements. And if you watch, I'm actually going to just select the whole model, okay. And you can see that there's 492 steel elements selected. We can give angles for all the various connections that we wish, if we want to kind of standardize an off angle rather than a positive angle, or if we were working on the roof, we may have a slope angle which will allow the connection to make tolerances for the slope. But we also need to go down here to the library path file, and the library path file is the one that we just saved in this example, or ideally you would have a templated blank file with all of your connection variables already detailed out and decided upon. So we're going to press open. You can see that the connection type to place is shear plate by default, because it's a beam to beam connection, okay? And then you merely have to press run. Now, this process can be a little bit lengthy, so bear with me and I'll reopen it now in a moment. I'm going to go and make a cup of coffee. And we're back, and I never got the opportunity to go get my coffee. It was too quick, okay? So looking on screen here, you can see that we have the run completed with errors, okay? And what it's going to say is 311 created, 312 applicable. And what it's doing is flagging that one wasn't created. And the reason the one wasn't created was that one already existed, which was the initial one that I had generated within the file, okay? So that's perfect, that's brilliant. That means all of them are there and present. And as you can see within the model now, every secondary member that we have that's a 203, be it a 203 133 by 25, 133 by 30, 102 by 22. It's all the same, because we gave the full list of the 203 UBs as the connection type, driving member size, if that makes sense, or profile size. So now you can see that every one of our secondary floor beams has a connection in place. And this is just, to be honest with you, this is mind-blowingly straightforward. It takes a little bit of tinkering to figure it out. As with the steel connections dialog generally, it can be a little bit clunky, I would say. But the fantastic thing now is we just place the one. We don't need to copy it around. We don't need to use arrays. We don't need to try like move it to the beam and then potentially lock it so that there's no interference or changing should the beam location change and this kind of stuff. We can merely just use our script now, and everything is there, and our connections look great, and we seem like we're spending much more time and energy on detailing out our models than we actually are. So that was number 4, which is the ability to associate steel connections to profile size in Revit. I cannot understate how much time this is likely to save people. It's very good. So feature number 5 that has been rolled out in Revit 2022 that I feel not enough people have acknowledged is the fact that the modified toolset now actually remembers your previous settings. Not only does it remember your previous settings, it remembers them between sessions. So if you close your Revit dialog and reopen it, it will remember that as well, okay? And I'm going to maybe go through a couple of examples of what tools retain what information between sessions, if that makes sense. Okay, so back in our structural file here again, let's say I just go to, oh God knows, I'll just go to one of the elevations here. Okay, so let's say we go to east elevation, north elevation. Yeah, we'll go to the north. Okay, so looking at this here now, you can see that we have this wall, and this wall has been created by editing the profile. Okay, but we can actually kind of retain the information across tools. So if we go to copy, constrain or multiple will be remembered between sessions. So let's say I did that, okay? And then I went to use the copy tool again. You can see that constrain is kept, but multiple was turned off, okay? So constrain is kept as a standard because it is a wall and therefore it should be locked into plane. But you can see that the multiple, which was selected previously and I turned off, is now turned off as a default and will be remembered as turned off the next time I turn on the program, okay? Similarly, the rotate tool, for example, and this is a bad example of a tool, a position to use rotate, but the copy or disjoin will be retained. So that's obviously not going to copy it now, but if I select that again and I go to rotate, you can see that copy remains selected because I used it previously. And again, when the models are shut down and Revit itself is shut down, it will retain the actual tool set and how you used it, the settings particular to the tool set. Like things like scale will remember your numerical values. Things like your the split tool will remember your segments, sizes, and all that kind of thing. Okay, if you want to find out more about what modify settings are retained between the sessions, I recommend you go to 8020bim.com. I actually have a link down the article there in the description, which itemizes basically every primary feature that Revit rolled out for 2022, and I've got a decent breakdown of what modify tools remember what settings across the sessions. So I recommend you go check that out. So that's number 5, which is that the modified tools remember their settings between sessions. So item number 6 is the load Autodesk family navigation improvements, basically. Okay, so when you go to your insert tab now, you can go to load Autodesk family, this button here, rather than the load family, which is the historic way of doing it. And what this does is this opens the Autodesk cloud-based repository for all the families. Okay, and you can actually select your the location of the information you want to derive it from. So you can see that I have it set to English, UK, but it could be United States, metric, imperial, Australia, Canada, India, New Zealand, etc. Okay, and these are all readily available to you. Okay, and what this does is this gives you a visual breakdown of the location of all the information. So rather than going through the file explorer and then having to look at the independent icons within the file explorer, you can actually do it directly within this window and actually see the family types in quite a bit more detail. You can also search, let's say, column for this instance. And what it'll do is it'll actually give you all the different locations that you might find the respective columns. And depending on the column you pick, this isn't necessarily perfect, but it might sometimes highlight where in the actual content breakdown the family is once you've selected the elements. So it also has much improved navigation. Like you've got back and forward buttons, you've got a home button, you've got much more utility in searching for this rather than going through the historic means, or it's just a better interface for accessing family data that is derived from Autodesk directly. So I feel this will improve, particularly for new and intermediate users. It's much more accessible. I think they'll spend less time kind of fooling around or trying to find information and more time actually generating information. Obviously, when you're intermediate or you're more advanced, you probably have your templated information, all your containers for the various family types and that kind of stuff established. But I think particularly for new users, this is a massive time saver and it's a useful implementation. I'm glad that they've done it. So feature number 7 I want to talk about is the added workset parameter in schedules. Now, it doesn't seem like much, but looking from a BIM coordinator's perspective or a BIM manager's perspective, it will be an absolute godsend in terms of making sure that you can check the workset association and controls in a project with ease. Okay, so it's very straightforward. If I go into, let's say, my steel column schedule here in a work shared file, you can see under my work set, all my columns are set to my primary frame work set. Okay, and we can do this for all the various work sets that we have in the project. And if we have work sets designated to individual personnel, the model coordinator can go through all of the various schedules, very quickly add the work set parameter into the schedule to ensure that all of the data in one family category type or anything along those lines is correctly assigned to the project work set. This is particularly important prior to issue going externally for any of the IFC or Kobe outputs or any of that kind of stuff. It also just makes sure that the right people are controlling the right elements at all time, and you see if there's, let's say, cross-pollination between people within your organization or third parties who are editing things that they shouldn't be. So it's a very, very quick sanity check for a BIM coordinator or BIM manager to be able to go in and check the work set integrity within a model without actually having to go and, manually go through the work sets. You can literally just pull up a schedule very quickly, add the work set parameter, and you're off to the races. So that is a very small but very substantial quality of life improvement for quite a few BIM users, I would say. So feature number 8 I want to talk about is the object scaling improvements for CAD exports. So unfortunately we live in the real world, and a lot of Revit users still have to work across with third parties who are CAD based, or clients might be CAD based if you're working for a large organization or what have you. We still have a requirement to export to CAD formats and to give people CAD information, okay? And historically Revit, when you got to larger scales, lost a lot of finer detail. So if you had a very large facility, let's say, or a shopping center or something like that, and you were requested a couple of GAs, there'd actually be a lot of work in actually providing them at a scale, because what would happen is you would export them at 1:500, 1:1000, but you would lose a huge amount of data. All the smaller, finer data would be lost. They've really improved the amount of data loss. There's still a small amount of it, which I'm going to show you in a moment, but it's negligible compared to what was happening previously. Okay, so looking at the ground floor here, I've just stripped away all the annotation and stuff because it was unlegible. All right, and we have this at 1:100. Okay, and I've already went through the process of exporting this at a scale of 1:100 and 1:1000 respectively. Okay, so going into CAD here. Okay, I'm going to open the 1:100 drawing, and it's exactly as you'd imagine it. It's the exact output, line for line, all the way through. Okay, so looking at our single line representation of the purlins and plan, you can see that even the smaller lengths of it are being caught all the way around. Okay, now going to the 1:1000, from a bird's eye view, it looks much the same, with the exception of obviously the hatch patterns aren't as dense. But going to the purlin there, you can see that looking at the same location, that's your 1:100 compared to your 1:1000. You can see that there's a problem with the purlin line length. Okay, but this is actually substantially better, because I could guarantee in previous versions there wouldn't even be a purlin there. Do you know? You might be lucky to get that framing element, and you might be lucky to get your door returns, let's say, for your OPEs, or even like the three lines representing the eye shape of your column. You might get one of them if you're lucky. So this is substantially improved. It's probably going to save a lot of time for people who have to continue to work with kind of the older and newer workflows. So it's a nice addition. It has its benefits. I don't think many people are going to even clock the benefit of it, to be honest with you. But it's only when you don't get complaints back will you recognize that you probably saved a bit of time from it. So that was number 8, which is the improved scaling of large scale exports from Revit. So new feature number 9 is the introduction of additional model categories in Revit. This is quite overdue, to be honest with you. So the good thing about this is if you're working in, let's say, the medical specific design field, where you've got a lot of kind of medical equipment and stuff to populate in your models, or if you're working for something like, let's say, a facility design, industrial, pharmaceutical, that kind of thing, you don't necessarily have to put everything into specialty equipment anymore. You've kind of got a little bit more flexibility. There's also improvements for other things such as hardscape and vertical circulation. Okay, so looking at the 80/20 BIM website here, what's listed, okay? So additional model categories included are medical equipment, vertical circulation, audio visual devices, hardscape, which is an architectural owned by us, I believe, temporary structures, etc. Okay, so the temporary structures might be hoarding, let's say, around, let's say you had a part of a site that had to remain operational. You may put in a temporary structure so that you can section off one part of a site from another while keeping it operational day to day. So there's a host of other smaller inclusions as well. What I do like about this is they're just expanding the family categories. It gives us more granular control and less fudging things, let's say. But I still think that there's more to do here. I think that it would be nice to have process equipment specific. Let's say it would be nice to have just a little bit more. I can't think of them off the top of my head now. I probably should have prepped this in advance, to be honest with you. But I can think of many use cases that still aren't covered by the family categories at the moment, and maybe I might itemize them in the blog post later on and kind of just say what Revit needs in terms of model categories. But look, it's a step in the right direction, and no more specialty equipment for everything at least, and medical devices particularly are a welcome addition. So feature number 10 I want to talk about very quickly is just all the rebar changes, really. So I have never ever allowed my company move to modeling rebar in Revit. It's been just too awkward. It's been too cumbersome. 3D rebar, to be honest with you, is a bit overkill in terms of model geometry as far as I'm concerned. But my mind is changing. Revit has implemented enough change now in Revit 2022 that I might advise the team to move away from CADS or C and to run at least a trial in Revit and see how far we get along. The number one feature I think that they've implemented for the rebar is the ability to actually draw 2-point rather than sketch it out. And what I mean by that is you can actually use like a rectangular drawing format to place your rebar. So in this instance, for example, if I go to structure, excuse me, rebar, I'm going to select by 2 points, and I'm literally going to click corner to corner there. Now that hasn't coupled properly, but you can see the power of that rather than historically having to go through and sketch the boundary. Okay, so that's one way that it has improved dramatically. Okay, outside of that, we can there's other improvements that are kind of quite substantial, and for example, we can move full rebar sets in one time now, whereas you couldn't do that beforehand. You can actually specify the bar diameter, a real bar diameter, while drafting rather than changing after the rebar has been placed. Another one is that it actually remembers the settings. So let's say I go back to rebar here and I want to do 2 points, but I want to do it in the vertical in the opposite direction. Okay, so let's say I draw a vertical in the opposite direction. Okay, so that's a 2-point rectangle that's been drawn in the vertical plane perpendicular to the one that I've done. Okay, and I cancel that, and then I go back into my rebar tool. It's going to remember the exact settings I had previously. It's going to remember it by 2 points. It's going to remember it's vertical against the current plane, and it's going to remember my rebar shape. Now, that's not between sessions. That's within one session. But that in itself stops. Like, I remember in previous versions trying to draft in rebar, and what would happen was you'd make an edit or an inclusion, let's say, into your rebar, and then you'd open the rebar tool afterwards again, and you would have to go through the same setup every time. And what it did is it increased the liability for user error, for misclicks and that kind of thing, as well as slowed the whole process down. So there's been substantial improvements into the rebar generation in Revit, to the point now that I think from my day job's perspective, I might talk with the team and see if we can roll out a sample project in Revit and see how we get on. Until now, I've never felt that it merited the inclusion. I thought it was over modeling, but Revit 2022 has significantly improved the rebar production methods, let's say. And I'm excited about it. I am actually. I think it'll be cool now to have finally what I would think is the completed federated models inclusive of Rebar, because I've always omitted it and it's just been a bugbear that hasn't been complete, to be honest with you. So that's number 10, which is all the Rebar improvements, specifically the 2-point drafting. So feature number 11 isn't really an independent feature in its own right, to be honest with you. In fact, I'm not going to talk about one specific feature. I'm just generally going to talk about the quality of life improvements. There has been so many quality of life improvements in Revit 2022 that it's going to be hard to not use it over any other version, even for existing projects. I'm looking at the battery projects we have now, and I'm genuinely thinking of all the ways that we could improve team efficiency by just migrating to 2022. Little tidbits that you might know is the ability to tag groups now, which is just insane. It sounds so simple. I think it was Aaron Mahler who flagged it to me on Twitter, that you can tag your groups now, so that not only are they schedulable and they can retain all the data and calc values and that kind of thing, but now we can actually have, instead of some sort of janky legend or similar, we can have meaningful tagging conventions for our grouped elements. So on large developments where, let's say, we have a multi-story tower or something like that with repeating rooms, which are in themselves, or repeating floors in themselves, a group, we can merely tag, like we can basically tag an entire floor and almost treat it as if it's an assembly drawing in its own right. So that is very, very powerful. There's a whole host of other things, like there's improved multi-category families and parameters, schedules, sorry. We have like again, I think the Aussie BIM guru and had stipulated that his favorite utility that's been rolled out was the ability to have custom revision numbering systems. All right, and I actually agree with that. I think, if you have to tie into some sort of ISO compliance or something like that, you couldn't do it historically without basically trying to cheat the system and trying to work around the revisioning system really awkwardly. And now it's just integral. We can just go and say, okay, well, here's our p values or whatever, and we're away to the races. There's just so many little things that have improved that I genuinely think, I'm really glad for that open letter. I think it was needed. I think it's put enough pressure on Autodesk to kind of ramp up what they're doing. Now, it's not wholesale, it's not across all their products by any means, but at least in Revit 2022, they have done a significant amount. And if we saw this rate of improvement year on year, I think that the future is actually very bright for Revit, rather than something coming up underneath it and taking its crown, So yeah, again, I recommend you go over and read the full blog post for the full breakdown. You will see all the quality of life improvements there that I'm talking about. There's more than I can even think of at the moment. So I highly recommend you go check it out. I'll leave it in the link below. As ever, I'm Niall. This is 80/20 BIM. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you've found out more about the Revit 2022 features than you may have otherwise. The need for this video, I thought, was that there's just a couple of unsung heroes maybe that, or little time savers that hadn't been mentioned previously by the million other BIM tubers, let's say. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Mind yourselves, take care. As always, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Join me over in the Discord community if you ever want to chat, and I'll see you all later. Be good, mind yourselves, and I'll catch you for the next one. Bye bye.